this edition of GG Unleashed. We're gonna sit down and talk with David Reid, who you can see. I think he's over there. Yeah, he's over there. We're gonna talk about some things, have a good little conversation, and drink some scotch while we're doing it.
All
So
right.
David Reid was the what was your title at Motiga, David?
Senior Vice President of Publishing.
Okay, all right. So we're sitting down with David, the former Senior Vice President of Publishing at Motiga. Now you are the CEO and founder of
Metaarcade, my friend.
Metaarcade, and this is a company that you started.
Absolutely.
Well, would love to kind of find out more about that, but want to find out first. We're a gigantic website, so we really want to kind of talk about that.
Oh, of course.
And so tell us a little bit about yourself before we jump into that, and kind of how you kind of came to be with Motiga and the gigantic scene.
Yeah. Well, before we do that, Tim, I'd like to thank you for having me here, and I'll raise a little
fancy
scotch.
Glass.
You like that? This is an official Scotch glass here. It is a Glencairn glass.
What is this?
That's not a bad glass. There you go.
It came with my decanter.
Well, nothing wrong with that. If I may, I know I know a lot of the Motiga community and gigantic community is well aware of my proclivity for Scotch drinking, and so if I might, I would show that I'm going with a particularly classy one this evening. This is the 22-year-old Battle Hill, imported into the U.S. by an importer company. It is not something that's easy to find from Strathmill Distillery, and it's quite a high-quality thing, and I was very pleased when I got it and have been saving the reservoir of it for good occasions, and this being one of them. So thank you kindly for having me, and it's great to be able to talk to everybody again, and well worth the 22-year-old Scotch.
Absolutely. I'm kind of jealous that you have a 22-year-old Scotch and I have a 12.
Well, you know what? We can share scotches later, and we'll make that up to you there.
We'll sit down and have a Scotch day.
Exactly. So, but in short, right? My Motiga story began in summer of 2014. I was winding down my time with the mighty CCP games. I had lived in Iceland for about a year with my family, and originally with CCP started a San Francisco office, and after about a year of that, the company, the board of directors was like, "Hey, David, it would be great if you could come to Iceland and work at headquarters," which was something my wife and I were up for trying with the kids while they were young, and that was a blast. But it was never something that we felt like we could do for longer than a year. That's an overseas move is a big deal. You're taking kids out of school, you're doing a lot of stuff like that. So we made the move for a year, and upon the time coming back, it did come, the commute between San Francisco and Iceland was a tough one for me and for the family. And so it became clear that with a move back to the States, it was probably time to start thinking about winding down at CCP and parting ways as gentlemen. And that was about the same time that I started talking with my old friend and former manager at NCSoft, Chris Chung, who, as you all know, is the CEO and co-founder of Motiga. Chris and Rick had gotten the game a pretty far way and were getting to a point where they thought commercialization would be soon. What a perfect time to bring in a publishing guy. And so that was when I joined Motiga officially in September of 2014, and been living in the Seattle area, working there up until, well, more properly November, December, right? And I think people in the Motiga and gigantic community are well aware of some of the challenges that the studio had in that era and some of the changes that happened along the way.
So, and we'll talk more about that. We really want to kind of pick your brain. You're no longer at Motiga, but you're also in no way a spokesperson or speaking on behalf of Motiga.
That's correct.
Everything we say, kind of your own personal opinion, right? So we'll keep that. Make sure
we'll keep it classy, though. Don't worry.
Classy? It's all fun.
No harm at all.
So San Francisco to Iceland to Seattle. How was that from a family perspective? I feel like that's a lot of culture shock.
It is, and look, I don't want to be. I don't want to sound overly Machiavellian about this, but there is a funny part of it where when we were actually making the move, there was a certain part of, we were doing this in, I want to say March was our first flight-ish to Iceland. And as it so happened, Iceland had like a record blizzard. And you can imagine that, record bad inclement weather in Iceland probably makes record bad weather in the West Coast of the United States look like a walk in the park. So part of what we did, Iceland, there's only 7 or so cities in North America where you can get a direct flight to Iceland on a regular basis, on a daily basis. One of those cities happened to be Orlando. It's not the big Orlando airport. It's a
Sanford.
smaller one out there. But it is one where a lot of Icelanders, when they go to take their Florida vacations, and I think that's how that route came to be. So I, in my wisdom, thought the right thing to do would be to get a real good taste of Americana at full blast before we moved to Iceland. So my wife, the two kids, and I, and my kids were much younger at the time. I'm going to say 8 and 6, sort of range. We fly from California to Orlando. We spend a week at Disney World.
Naturally.
Weather's awesome. Walking around in t-shirts and shorts and eating French fries in 80-degree weather. And we get on a plane for Iceland. And we land at the Keflavik airport in the heat of the worst blizzard. Heat's the wrong word. In the throes of the worst blizzard. But it was nuts. And so, you land and it's effectively a red eye. You're getting there first thing in the morning, 6 in the morning. It's pitch black outside, and banks of snow kind of shoulder deep and higher. We literally come out of the doors for the airport into this darkness, and the snow is coming sideways at us as we're walking to the van. 6-year-old, he starts getting blown away by the wind, right? The cab driver grabs his hand, and it's like one of those moments. No, we're not leaving you behind, and put him in the van. And literally, when we get into the van, my eldest was like, "Daddy, why did you bring us here?" But it got better fast. Right? And Iceland was an awesome adventure for all of us. It started off a bit rocky,
right.
But living, I can't evangelize it enough. I think the idea of taking young kids out of the States, taking them overseas for a while, giving them that experience in another culture, it's awesome. It's a great thing to do. It helps your kids really get a sense of, it lets them feel fortunate about the things they have, and it lets them feel very fortunate about the things that they got to see that they don't get to see on a day-to-day basis. Iceland is a different country, of course. It's a very small country, but it is also a very English-friendly country. A lot of people there do speak English, and the only trouble I ever had was the occasional cab driver at 2 a.m. who didn't speak a lot of English, but always found my way back home with them nonetheless. And working at CCP was a blast, a studio that really goes after big, ambitious projects, things that other studios aren't capable of doing or are afraid to try. I always loved that sort of maverick pioneering aspect, and wouldn't trade it for anything.
And they just, not to talk too deeply on Eve, but they just recently had this large-scale battle in Eve that I was reading about, where they're trying to overthrow one of these big conglomerates or something like that. And you don't really get that.
This is what makes it awesome, though, right? Is that Eve is even if you're not a big Eve player, and to be clear, I never was. I always found the game a little too challenging for me to really figure out how to play it well. But you couldn't help but just be fascinated by the things players could do in Eve, and the alliances and the backstabbing and these wars of tens of thousands of people playing, hundreds of thousands of dollars of virtual goods destroyed in one battle. I mean, this was pretty heady stuff. And I think the company is in great shape as you think about taking the core of that sort of experience on a single shard, sort of a high fidelity shared experience and economy. As VR goes forward, I think they're in a really good place to do some amazing things with the confluence of those technologies.
Yeah, I think VR is definitely going to, I think it will eventually kind of pave the way for new experiences in. Well, I was playing Elite Dangerous with my Oculus Rift, and that was spectacular, right? It's just you feel like you're in the ship. Like when you're looking at your monitor and you're
yes.
you're playing, it's flat. But when you put on the Oculus and you look up and you realize how absolutely monstrous the ship that you're in is, it's pretty. I actually played Valkyrie at PAX Prime, and it was neat.
Well, and Valkyrie is a perfect example of the sort of stuff that works really well in VR, because today we haven't quite nailed down, we as an industry, right, haven't really nailed down how to do good locomotion in VR. I mean, the idea of walking in a Grand Theft Auto or a Fallout in VR, I think we're a ways away from that, right? That's it's not as easy as being able to look around with your head and then moving forward with a thumbstick on a controller, right? Whereas with Valkyrie, with Elite Dangerous, with a racing game, you're in real life, you're sitting in your chair, your couch, what have you, with controls in your hand. In the virtual world, you're pretty much doing the same thing, right? You're sitting in a chair, you got a steering wheel, you got flight controllers and stuff. Those experiences translate really, really well to VR. However, how many of those do you really want to play,
Right.
right? How many of those can be successful? I think VR, to your point, I think I'm absolutely excited about the potential of it. I was at CCP, I still am. I don't know how long it will take for VR to be a big business
Right.
in gaming, right? I think it's going to be there are going to be certain genres that play very well in VR, and there are going to be others that they're going to have to solve some of these latency, immersion, locomotion problems before they become big in VR.
Yeah, especially with things like people try and do like roller coaster simulators and things like that,
Yeah,
and it's just it makes you sick to your stomach after
yeah.
doing it 2 or 3 times. But I think with anything technology, I mean, if you look back to when Eve came out in what 2002, it was it, it was graphically more beautiful than any game on the market had been, and it was just
Yeah,
stars. Because I mean, at that time, it was for MMO's sake, it was Ultima Online, EverQuest, Asheron's Call, and I think Dark Age of Camelot had just come out.
well, and
Or,
you're right, but don't forget there were other things that came out. So, the one that people at CCP always looked at was Earth and Beyond coming
oh,
out from
that's
EA.
right,
And if you
Westwood
remember, right, that
Studios.
yeah, that was thought to be a game that might kill Eve Online, and it didn't. Right?
Yeah,
It was just
I
very
loved
different.
Earth and
Right?
Beyond. It was a great game though.
Yeah,
Oh
yeah.
man, those
But
glossy
yeah,
finishes on my spaceship. Oh,
yeah.
a game that
Well,
didn't
and
live its.
the art in Eve still holds up well.
Yeah,
Right? You fly those ships, you see those nebulas. It's a beautiful game. There's no
yeah,
question about it.
yeah, absolutely. So you had great times at CCP. Obviously, you have fond memories of that,
Oh yeah.
and then so it was kind of time to bring the family back to the states. And was that a culture shock for the kids, especially?
We took good care of that. I admire, but cannot do it myself. There are parents who, when they move to Iceland, they just put their kids in the Icelandic school system, and that's all Icelandic all the time, right? And I think kids of a certain age can handle that. Our kids were probably a little too old and to handle that culture shock. So we did have there was the Icelandic International School, is there were 70 or so kids in the school, and obviously all of them were children of expats, but that school was embedded inside a normal public school in Iceland where there were 300 some kids, so they got a good experience that way without too much of the culture shock. The weather and the sunlight are the biggest culture shocks, I think. And really the sunlight. You're in a country where you're so far north. You're at like the 66th parallel that when it's summertime, the sun is out all the time. And it's out at like 4 a.m. In the wintertime, it's dark all the time, right? You have like 4 hours of gray, and then the sun goes back down, and that can be hard for a lot of people. We weathered our first Icelandic winter reasonably well. Everybody tells me it's the
Except for
second
your
one
son, who
that
almost got blown away. But
yeah, but that was just a moment. We got through that unharmed, and uh, but I do hear from a lot of people that it's that second winter that gets you.
right, you didn't start like keeping kite strings on them just in case the kids
No,
flew
no, no,
away.
no. I mean, really, once you get your feet under you, it all worked
Yeah.
out fine, and it
Like
was
sea
fun too
legs.
because yeah, it kind of is. It kind of is, and it is a look. It's a beautiful country. It really is. It's a very quiet country once you get outside of Reykjavik. And immense natural beauty to find all over the place. I don't know that we could live there again for a year or more, but I love going back.
Yeah,
I've gone back since then, and I expect I still will.
good. Yeah, I'd definitely like to go to Iceland and just kind of see it because it's called Iceland for a reason, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Well, all right. So we shouldn't turn this into a discussion only about Iceland at
no,
CCP, but one of the jokes is that Greenland and Iceland should switch their
yeah,
names,
because the
right?
Vikings,
That
I guess, named it
yeah.
Iceland, so nobody would come there or
So
something.
no one would go. No one would want to invade,
Yeah,
right?
so
Whereas, it is a very a very hospitable area for the most part.
yeah,
Um, but it is funny because the nation of Iceland is the landmass is about the size of the United Kingdom. You wouldn't necessarily know that if you didn't think about it. But however, the population is some 30 times less, right? It's 320, 330,000 people in Iceland versus what 70 some million in the United Kingdom.
right.
So all right, maybe that's more like 20 times less than 30. But but
Yeah.
but still, the point being, there are parts of Iceland where it is like being on the moon, and it's beautiful scenery, and there's no one around, and you don't even have that hum of civilization around. The kind of constant white noise of generators and lights running and
The
cars
arcade
driving in the
halls.
background.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it is what nothing sounds like. And I don't
Outstanding.
know how many other places in the world you can find that. It's well worth going.
Yeah.
And when you do decide to make the trip, let me know. I can hook you up. I know all kinds of things.
Outstanding. So we got back to Seattle and we started with Motiga and kind of just
Exactly.
what was your experience like with Motiga and just because I want to kind of get into
Yeah,
what happened, right? And so
sure.
just kind of talk to us about your first couple days at Motiga and your kind of experience with Gigantic and really the Gigantic community. I'd love to hear about from a publishing standpoint what your take on that was.
Yeah, it's a great thing to talk about. I mean, I will tell you this: I think I learned a lot about community at CCP. It is definitely a company that does a great job of working with its community and listening and bringing feedback into the product and doing events with them and such. But I gotta say, I think Motiga even had a leg up on that, right? I mean, I thought the community coach program was an enormous insight. It was just a great idea. It worked out very well. There are certainly a lot of things about Motiga I miss. At the end of the day, I think more than anything, I miss the community. I miss the events we would do together. I miss going to PAX with people. I miss even Gamescom. Right, I only got to go to Europe once, but meeting those European gamers who were part of the community was a blast. Doing things like this with the gigantic community, always just a lot of fun. And I give Troy a lot of credit for coming up with this idea. I think it worked really, really well, and it is one of the things that I hope to emulate in my future endeavors, because I just think it was good for the business, it was good for the gamers, it was good for the employees in the studio. It just, there was just a lot of strength that came out of that, both as, you know, from the sense of let's do the right thing for people, but let's also do the right thing for the business. I
Right.
think that is an example of something that performed brilliantly on both fronts. But to your question as well, right? The early days at Motiga really were for me about figuring out how to construct the plan of, remember that this is a game that had just been exposed at PAX. They'd had a little announcement and a thing at AFK Tavern out here in the Seattle area to debut the game to the community, and then the first real event was at PAX Prime that year. Uh, from there, it became clear we had something and needed to start thinking about the plan of how to get the word out outside of the community and with the community, right? How to amplify the excitement around Gigantic into a bigger way. So this was something that really occupied a lot of my early time. A lot of work on sort of the what I'll call the publishing planning side. All right, when do we think this game is going to ship? All right, based on that, when do we want to announce milestone X, milestone Y? What do we want to do at these different events and things? It was very clear that we had a game that we thought could be successful on console as well as PC. And so a lot of the publishing work that I was doing very quickly was to talk with platform owners, to talk with the console guys and see what we could do about bringing the game onto console and where the best fit on that was. So a lot of work on that. But more than anything, I think the thing I really took away from those early days was just how much craftsmanship, how much care, how much love was going into the creation of the assets, of the heroes, of the maps, the particle effects around everything. There was something beautiful being made there for sure.
Right. And it's still, I mean, it's a beautiful game, and I think the art style is one of the things that attract a lot of people to it. I'm not
No question.
I'm not a big art guy. I enjoy the gameplay, but that's neither here nor there. So,
Yeah. Well,
uh,
and honestly, it spoke to people in a good way at a good time for it, right? I think one of the things that I never felt like was something we needed to explicitly say at Motiga about Gigantic, but we always had to make sure people knew was, again, in an era where some very ugly Gamergate stuff was happening for other games and other studios, I was pretty proud of the fact that at Motiga we had a game that had strong, sexy, confident female characters that weren't skanky, right?
right.
And I don't know how more direct to put it. I think that's really important, and it was something that I was personally very proud of, and I know a lot of people in the studio were very proud of. It's not necessarily something that you feel like you have to make a tip of a spear in your messaging, but it was the kind of thing that whenever we made an asset, whether it was key art or some of the trailers we did, we wanted to make sure we had a good blend of characters in there that didn't just show up a wide range of mechanics in the game, but also highlighted these awesome female
Right.
characters we have that other games simply don't.
Right.
We were that was a pretty good thing for us.
Yeah, and I think that's a big thing for Gigantic is each character kind of represents its own personality, um, and that personality is kind of derivative of how they look. Where you take a look at some other games where they're kind of they sell sex. I mean that's
Right.
really what it is. And I have to, on that same topic, I have to give it to Blizzard recently. I don't know if you saw what happened with
Of course.
Overwatch, Tracer and the sexy pose and
Buttgate.
yeah, Buttgate. I think everything's a
Yeah.
gate now. So
Well, it has to
so
be.
yeah, because why not? Watergate
That's how we
started it
know.
all.
That's how we know there's a scandal, right?
It's
How else are
all
you going to know?
yeah, thanks Watergate. Um, so obviously the best part of it was just everything and as far as the community and things like that. But the work, what was the best part of the work? The actual 9 to 5.
Well, it's a great team of people, right? A lot of talented people. Some of whom were friends from other companies that like I had said, working with Chris and other members of the team there at NCSoft. I didn't have a huge overlap with a lot of the ArenaNet guys, but I knew Finney and I knew a number of the other leads that had come from ArenaNet. It was just a blast.
Yeah,
Culturally, again, it's the kind of thing. It was awesome until it wasn't, right? Once the company started hitting financial distress, that puts a lot of pressure on everybody, and
right.
it's a challenging situation. It's definitely tough.
And I think that kind of sums up. I would guess that the worst parts of it were the financial distress. I'm going to guess, but tell me if I'm wrong.
No, you're right, and I think it's not unique in the industry
Right.
what Motiga has gone through. I mean, obviously we all see these stories about a number of studios and such, but it did get me thinking about maybe doing something differently this time, right? As I think a lot about how things evolved at Motiga, it certainly gave me a chance to think about my own role in these decisions and how that worked, as well as others, and to think about where the industry at large has evolved, and is that the only way to do things going forward,
Right.
right? And give me a good, with some of the winding down that was happening to preserve capital, I certainly found myself with more time to think about these things.
So since that's the topic of discussion, what happened? Like everyone, from your perspective, obviously this is again. I want to reiterate this is
Yep.
David is no longer associated with Motiga. This is his personal experiences with, and I don't think there's any bad blood between the two organizations, right?
Absolutely not. And I'll just keep it on the level with y'all. You know, I've had a discussion with Chris, and I'm doing some minor incubation out of the Motiga studio. Right? We're all still best friends, and I still believe and hope for the success of the game and the people who are working on it. There's nothing bad there to say. I do think that a lot of like you say, how did it go in this direction, right? And there's never one answer. I would tell you that as you have nicely caveated for me, no longer a Motiga spokesperson and have not been involved in the day to day at Motiga for many months, really. I mean, 6-ish months, I guess, if I think about it. Really, in November, I started to wind down a bit. I guess it's not quite 6 months, but it's pretty darn close.
Right.
But I do think it comes down to really there are two major things that cause the trouble. And the first, it would be impossible to look past a lot of the complications around Windows 10 and UWA, right? It's just this was a platform that was still being built when Motiga started working on it, and it is the kind of thing that uh, we would hear on a pretty frequent basis in the studio. Okay, a new change just came to pick your thing. Visual Studio 2015, and now the build is broken, and it takes 3 days of engineers doing really low-level detective work to figure that out. It's not easy, and it's not the kind of thing you budget for when you make your schedules, and it really hurts. Right
Right.
now, I don't blame either side for that, but that's just reality. It is the physics of the situation. I don't think Motique is the only studio who. I think you look at what happened with Fable Legends, and there's probably some Windows 10 complexity exacerbating the problems that they
Right.
may have been having. Right? And so I think it would be very fair to say that's part of the issue. I don't think that's all the issue, right? And in candor, I do think, with any studio I've ever been at, there is a tension between the voice of the business and the voice of the game, if you will,
Right.
right? And when I say that, I would put it like this: there's never been a game that I've worked on where the people who were in charge of driving the business and the people who were in charge of making the game awesome from a creative direction level agreed on timing, right? The creative group would always like to have as much time as possible to make the game as awesome as possible and to
Right.
polish every last bit of it. Whereas the business guys are people who are looking at how much money are we spending, how much time do we have, what's the right window to launch something, in the competitive landscape and how the market is moving and such. That was true at NCSoft, at Microsoft, at CCP, at Tryon, and at Motiga. That's not a unique to Motiga problem. I do think that problem, coupled with the issues around how to make something work well in a new platform of Windows 10 that had not completely been built yet, really became part of the tension of how to make this happen. And I would have said that, as the voice of publishing, we were going through the summer of 2015, after a big announcement at GDC of what we were doing with Microsoft and a great partnership there,
Right
bringing the
into
game to
PAX
E3.
East, right?
Yeah, right into PAX East, which was terrific. I mean, look, at some level, it's good to be lucky as well as good, right? In the publishing discipline, because sometimes those things line up really, really well. And going to GDC with Microsoft, being part of that keynote, going to PAX East, heading to E3, and having our new trailer as part of the Xbox keynote, these are amazing assets to have at your disposal from a publishing perspective to really keep the ball rolling and building momentum and excitement and hype. Uh, However, as we went through the summer, it became clear that we were struggling to get the core mechanics of the game shippable from a perspective, and no one in the community is going to be surprised by this. The simple act, what sounds simple, of picking 4 friends to play with and playing against another team of 5. Obviously, everybody in the gigantic community knows that was a rough patch for us in that particular time frame. And I think as an exec team, we differed in our thinking about how much effort to put on that versus how much effort to put on art versus how much effort to put on other things, right? And again, is there a right answer? I don't know. I mean, I think I look at gigantic and I see, you know, I see emblematic art that reminds me of Pixar, right? I see
Right.
a polish level that makes me think of Blizzard at times, and I understand the unwavering dedication to make that right, right? And if I were a creative director, which to some extent I get to be now in my current gig, I get that, and I don't necessarily think that's wrong, but it is at odds with the realities of the business sometimes, and there is only so much money, and you've got a studio with a lot of people. There are fans who have been in a beta or an alpha for a long time who are looking for something new. Those things were at odds,
Just a little while.
yeah, well, certainly, look, it is what it is, and I'm not going to say that any one person's point of view was right.
Right.
I do think it was the collection of us as an exec team who tried to figure this out and do the right thing, and we differed in our perspectives
Yeah.
on this, as exec teams always do at studios. Uh, like you say, at the end of the day, those are the two things I would say. The complexity around building for a Windows 10 platform and UWA integration that was, and for those who don't know, UWA is Universal Windows Application, to make a game run on Windows 10 and Xbox One, right? But Windows 10 and UWA integration on the one hand, and then that perspective of getting the rest of the engineering and publishing effort together versus how much effort do you put on art and animation and those things, right? When that's your magic, I understand how that becomes a very interesting and challenging conversation for very smart people who all want the same thing to have,
Right. And
no doubt.
I think one thing that happens in the community, and in not just gigantic in general, but in general rather, is that people forget that gaming is a business, and so
Yeah,
there are two gears that are kind of spinning at each other, and sometimes pardon me, spinning with each other. So you have to take these two moving parts that are moving at rapid paces and a very, very dynamic pace and get them to align, right? They're all doing their own thing. And when the gears align is, hopefully at launch time when everything is great and wonderful and good.
yeah,
But, you're never going to have a game that the studio is completely flawless or anything like that, just from my experience. And this obviously is, you know, but I think that's a good transition into maybe that might not be the case here. So you left Motiga in November and you started up Metaarcade. It's kind
Well,
of
and let me be a little clearer and precise on the timing.
okay.
November was a time where, the beginnings of financial distress were happening, right?
Okay.
And not from a perspective of, oh my God, we're out of money, but we could see that if we didn't have some Herculean change in when things were shipping, that it was going to be a problem. And so
Right.
one of the things that as execs we all did was we found ways to save the company money on our salaries, right? And so as an example, in my own case, I went down to working 1 day a week at that time
Oh wow.
because we didn't have a game that really needed a lot of publishing, right? And so other execs did similar things, right? Obviously not Chris, not Finney, who are Rick, who are still building a game and things like that. But those of us who had stuff that was a little further afield made sense to work fewer days. And as the unabashed Bethesda fanboy I continue to be, Fallout 4 had just come out, gave me a great winter to play a lot of Fallout.
Perfect
It
timing.
all worked out fine. And of course that moment led to the first layoff in December, where publishing was largely impacted. It hit the entire studio to some extent, but it really was a big piece of publishing, and that was the right thing to do. It just was. I don't like the human impact this has on anybody. Nobody does. But from a look at the numbers perspective, you got a game that's shipping. You need to keep the studio side building this game together, whereas the
Right.
publishing side was, if you think about a train, we're a little closer to the caboose than the engine. It made sense for us to dial down a bit, and so that's the point at which I become much less involved. Deep in the winter, playing a lot of Fallout, thinking about what might be next for me. That's really where the ideas for Metaarcade sort of came together for me. And I would say the official beginning of Metaarcade is probably in February,
Okay.
right? Where when as people who are passionate fans of the community will know, February 9th was when Motiga officially laid off all its staff. And I think that's pretty darn close. I'd have to look to the date at which I officially did the LLC paperwork to give birth to Metaarcade as a company in the state of Washington. It's pretty. That's about the right time frame.
All right, I got you. Okay, so Meta Arcade kind of came to life in February. What is it? What what
What is it?
what is it? It's
I look, obviously I'm excited to talk about this sort of stuff, so I'll give you a few pictures on that, right? I think I want to start with the sort of philosophy at some level that I have seen kind of now from 10 plus years working in online games, right? If you think back to early stuff with Microsoft and Xbox Live, all the way through Rift at Tryon, Eve at CCP, Gigantic at Motiga and such, right? There has been, as much as there have been a lot of independent studios coming out with games and finding creative ways to fund them, as much as there have been more and more tools made available to developers, and not just in the game industry, but young companies, period. There still is a bit of the industry being dominated by what I'll call the big bet, right? The idea that we're going to make a game that demands a large investment. You have to raise a lot of capital one way or another. And, if you're a successful ongoing business like a Blizzard, right, you can pay for Hearthstone and Heroes of the Storm from the existing proceeds you have. But when you're a Motiga that doesn't have a game in the field yet, you're raising money to do that, right? And you raise this money, you hire a big team, you spend, tens of millions of dollars and hundreds of man years, and before you really know, do you have something great? And to start with for Metaarcade, I want to go in the exact opposite direction. I want to start with the seed of something that I believe can be successful. I want to engage the community on it. I want to have those discussions that build on what I learned at Motiga and at CCP, and to a lesser extent Tryon, but really, to the extent I got a PhD in how to work with communities, it happened at CCP and at Motiga. And there's a lot of good there that I hope to bring into this thing, where you're not sitting here in the, kind of like I said in my first blog post, the ivory tower of the industry, where a designer is contemplating what's the perfect game to build. Let's build something smaller. Let's build something that we can get into the hands of a community faster, and let's get real feedback into that process. Let's make sure we're building a game that we think our community, our target gamer, is going to enjoy.
Right.
And that's the first part of how I'm thinking about this. And I am planning to have a prototype ahead of, I think people will be playing our first game. I don't want to put a date on it because as soon as you jinx yourself, but in the calendar year of 2016, that's going to happen, right? I
So
am
we're not
not
going to see
looking
you
to
at
wait.
PAX
PAX East?
next
No.
week.
PAX Prime? Maybe.
Yeah.
And that would be, I would say one of the governing things. Now, I could unpack that a little more, right? Okay, so great. Understand the sort of start small, grow organically from there. I think a lot of people can get that, but that doesn't answer necessarily what kind of games I'm hoping to make. And this is where the name Metaarcade has been something that stuck with me for a number of years. It comes from a project that I worked on when I was actually at GameTap. And I don't know who's going to remember GameTap, but I was at Turner Broadcasting running marketing for a business called GameTap in the 2006, 2007, 2008 timeframe. It was the first job I took after Xbox. And GameTap was a games on demand subscription business. You'd pay $10 a month and you had all you could eat of up to at our peak, we surpassed 1,000 games. A lot of those were old arcade games, all the way back to Pong. But we also were able to emulate arcade games, and they're real emulators that were running on the PCs now. We had games from consoles ranging from the Atari 2600 all the way to the Dreamcast. And we had PC games that had just come out. And we debuted games like the first Sam and Max from Telltale and Mist Online from Cyan. So, at any rate, a big portfolio of titles. And originally, there was an idea of how do we get people. We were seeing things where people have favorite games and they spend a lot of time in that game. How do we get them to go across the portfolio of games that GameTap had? And the idea of Metaarcade was sort of an idea of how do you get people across a bunch of games? What's the essence of that? So this is where I'll ramble a little longer, right? If I were to deconstruct Metaarcade with that in mind, when you think about arcade games, there's certain commonalities there. All arcade games, number one, they were fast, right? They were short session, intense games. Yes, every now and then you'd walk into an arcade and there'd be somebody who had mastered Dragon's Lair, and you could see the crowd surround them and watch that guy go through Dragon's Lair for an hour to beat the game. But for the most part,
The game has
it
an
was
ending.
it has an ending.
Huh?
I've done it. Not in the arcade. I did it on the PC many years later. But there is an ending, and it's not an easy ending to get to. But it was by and large a short session experience, right? It wasn't something that demanded you to play one game for hours on end. The second thing I would say about arcade games is that they weren't expensive, right? I mean, in their heyday, it was 25 cents to play Space Invaders or Zaxxon or Time Pilot or what have you. But even today, if you go into a modern era arcade, a GameWorks or something like that, right? You're not spending a huge amount of money. It may be $1 for a high end game. It's probably 25 cents to continue to play the old stuff from the classic arcade genre. So they were short session, they were inexpensive, and they were hard. They were challenging, right? I do think that there are a lot of games out there now. You get out of the PvP side of things, and there are a lot of easy games out there. I think part of why I look at Fallout 4 and I'm excited about survival mode as a Fallout fan is Fallout 4 by itself had become a little too easy for me, right? I've leveled up really high because I got to freaking do every side quest and find every object everywhere in the world. As a 75th level character, it's a pretty easy game, right? I don't find myself feeling in peril in combat very often. But that's something that I think is important in gaming, right? The challenge, the risk that, hey, I may not win this fight. I may not find the right object, and I may have to craft a different strategy to do that. I think arcade games gave you a lot of that. They were fast, they weren't expensive, and they were hard. And so when I think about Metaarcade, those are the kinds of things I want to do. I want to make games that don't require you to play 6 hours at a time. I want to make games that don't cost you an arm and a leg, and I want to make games that have a challenge. And I want to reward people who figure out how to get through the challenge. And there is no necessarily one right way to do it. And that'll be a lot of what we do. Now, that's the arcade part of Metaarcade, if I will. What's the meta part mean? I think when you think about arcades, there was a very fundamental social aspect of what happened there a lot. There were, you'd go there with your friends, you'd be arguing with each other about who would get a high score. You could look at a leaderboard on the arcade game and see who were the top 10 players on Tempest or what have you, and you could take a lot of pride if you got into the top 10. That social interactivity is very different today, right? There are a lot more avenues at your disposal of driving competition within a community, of driving collaboration of a group towards a particularly challenging goal. Obviously, there are things that you can do on social media, but even beyond that, the idea of there are certain businesses out there where you're seeing them do things, and I'll give you a completely orthogonal example of Amazon, where if you go and look at what's selling well on Amazon, they can tell you what the best sellers in the world are, but they can also tell you what the best sellers in your neighborhood are. And they can tell you that, of people who have liked this, the top 10 selling books are this, right? There is a way to do something with this kind of arcade experience, if you will, modernized to the modern era, to allow for that sort of experience of, well, maybe I'm not top 10 in game X worldwide, but I might be top 10 in my friends list. I might be top 10 in my neighborhood. I might be top 10 in my state. That has a lot of meaning for a lot of gamers who are looking for that challenge, the ability to prove themselves and see their name in lights when they succeed. Now we're getting to the real essence of what I aspire for Metaarcade to really be about.
Okay. I'm still confused, but that's okay. So,
well, help me out. What can I tell you? I mean, short of I'm not ready.
You're not ready to tell us what it is.
Formally announce a game yet,
so,
right? Give me a little longer on that one, but game one is in development for sure. Yeah.
So something that's fast, hard, and not a lot of time commitment, right?
Yeah, not expensive either.
And not expensive either. Okay. So those three aspects with fundamental social principles behind the game that allow you to compete with other people.
Yeah, I think you got it pretty good, Tim.
Okay.
That's
all right.
You're not that confused.
Well, I wanted to make sure you put all the pieces together during some of this. It's fine. So
nothing wrong with any of that.
Absolutely. So, how did you? What brought you to this decision to kind of start your own? I'm guessing it's an indie studio. That's a big deal. That's
sure
frightening.
Well, it is, and it isn't, right? And I'll tell you that at some level, when you go through this process of thinking about it, the way my career has wandered and the moments that I found myself in, now's the time to do this, right? If you had a vision, if you had an idea, you're not always in a position to go and pursue that, right? But now having, the sort of the situation that we were in over the winter time with Motiga, it, for better or for worse, it gave me time to really think about what is something that I personally am passionate about doing, and what is something that I personally can get started. It is easier than ever today to get something independent started, right? I mean, there are so many tools out there for people. There are so many forums of people providing advice. There are so many ways that if you want to get funding, you can. There are so many ways to engage with a community of gamers and get their feedback on the process and make your product better as a result, so that you're not just making a game that you think is cool. You're making something that a community of people thinks is cool and wants to be part of. I'm sure these things will all get better with time, but there is a bit of an inflection point going on now where you as an individual have a lot more at hand to go forth and do something like this and make an independent studio and build your own game. I don't think it's ever been easier. Doesn't mean it is easy, right? It is certainly something where, to your point, it's there are parts of this that are a little daunting. I'm not a coder. I haven't been since I graduated from college. I know a bit about it, but I'm not the guy who's going to code a game. And to that end, I have been talking with folks. I've been getting help. I've been doing freelance work, or I've been doing it. I've been engaging with freelancers to do work. That part of it, to the extent that when you're the founder of something and you run into things that you can't personally tackle through force of will and sweat, that's when things can get a little scary. And so I am going into that very deliberately, working with people I know and respect, looking at opportunities to bring expertise in, not from a perspective of like I said originally, not from a perspective of go hire a whole bunch of people and raise a bunch of money to do that, but to get the surgical strikes as I need them to make something happen.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, it is a little scary. It is the kind of thing that you realize, hey, this could completely be a disaster and fail. And when you sort of look at that in the eye and over a little scotch, right? What's the worst that happens, right? You don't, unless you're really nuts, it's not something that puts anybody in any real peril, right? It's a few months of a career that you've taken a diversion on, as opposed to signing back up for the next big job. This was the right time for me, and it's different for every individual. But this was absolutely the right time for me to give something like this a shot.
Right. And so I guess the big thing is that you know are your kids going to be able to be put through college? I mean, because this sounds like a
Yes.
huge financial thing. Like, are you gonna go out and you said you're not gonna go raise a, it's not one of those things where you go and find investors, but a lot of the gaming world has kind of taken to things like Kickstarter or Indiegogo. Is that kind of in the landscape of things that you've looked at or considered for the future of Metaarcade?
I'll tell you, I've absolutely looked at it, and I think even more than the money you might raise through crowdfunding, the feedback and the engagement you get, that's priceless. I mean, it's just got such a huge value. There's something like that is going to happen for Meta
Right.
Arcade. I can't say to you that we're going to go out and crowdfund necessarily, but there is a level of engagement from the community that I think is just fundamentally pivotal to being successful in games these days. And I think if you don't bring that into your process at an early stage, you're doomed to disappoint people, right? And no, you can't make everybody happy when you go through this process, but you should at least know your target gamer what it is their reaction is, right? You
Right.
should at least get that sense and make sure you do that. So whether it's for crowdfunding in terms of literally raising money, or it's just an exercise to bring the community in to get a first look at a game and get their involvement and their feedback, that's got to happen. That's got to
Right.
happen. Now, to the financial question, look, I think it's let me say this. I'm not nuts. I have married a rational, wonderful woman. We are not gambling the kids' college fund on this kind of thing. It is something where I confess that it's a little uncomfortable after many years of being a salaried man at very varying levels in a bunch of companies, to not have that salary coming in every month. But once again, this is all in the planning. You
Right.
think about how much money do I really need to put into this now? How much money will I need to put into it later? You just take each milestone and each risk reduction moment as it comes. And you look a little further ahead, and I would never I would never gamble the welfare of my family to pursue a creative endeavor. Right now, it's a thread the needle sort of thing that I
Right.
am able to thread.
Well, good.
If
And
I'm
and
not,
it's
we may make some different
yeah.
plans.
And I think that I might have worded that a little bit too personally. I apologize for that. Um,
No, it's fine. It's
but
fine.
it's always a wonder, is especially considering what happened to Motiga with all of this funding that came in,
Yeah,
and suddenly money is the biggest issue, and I think people tend to forget that, like I said before, it's a game, it's a business, but it's also money. It's also
yeah.
people's livelihoods. And when the studio got shut down in February, or the number of layoffs that happened, that affected real people's lives. And and that happens all over. Carbine just went through something similar, where they
Yeah.
laid off 70 plus people. And some of my, actually the person who helped me start this website, was let go from Carbine during that period. So it's
Geez. Yeah.
yeah, so
Very real.
it's very real, and there's something, the gaming industry, can be very brutal at times, um,
Yeah.
and it's an unforgiving bitch at times, right?
Yeah. And that is not lost on me, right? And
Right.
this is, candidly, part of the approach I'm taking on this front is to make sure I do as much as I can to avoid that having to happen, right? And it, if there comes a moment where it makes sense to go raise more money to hire more people, I want to do that with the knowledge that it's coming from a core of something that is going to succeed,
Right.
right? I don't want to be in a position where I'm hoping for profit and hiring people and asking them to make giant changes in their lives and gamble with me, right? I'll be the gambler on this one. And if I start seeing traction and I start seeing kind of like the window of profit happening, well, now I know it's okay to start thinking about officially hiring people.
Right.
But until that happens, right, I'm going to try and do this as best as I can with freelancers, with contractors, pay them for the work they do and be fair about that, but not ask people to compromise and bet everything
Right.
that David Reid knows what he's doing and Metaarcade is going to go be very successful.
Right. So
I have a lot of confidence and a lot of optimism, but again, that's me, and it's a risk I'm taking for now. It's not a risk that I want to ask others to take until I know I can look them in the eye and say, we've got this. We're on this. The money's going to come. The profit's there in the engine. However it is, I'll know it when it happens.
right.
I don't plan to hire a bunch of people until we see that happen.
Good. And I think this is in no way saying that anybody in the gaming community should stop their 9 to 5 and become a game publisher. This is you've
Right.
had years of experience doing this, and you're at a place in your life where you're comfortable enough to make this kind of drive forward.
Yeah. I mean, look, it's a risk, and it is something that, like I said, Vicky, my excellent, awesome, beautiful wife, and I talk about every day, and it would be easy, if you will, at some level, to just go and get another salary job and keep going and that sort of thing. I I just, we all feel at some level, anyone who's ever played a game has probably thought about making one someday. And I've seen a lot of stuff happen over the past decade where I felt like, I'm seeing things happen in the industry. I'm seeing, you know, costs are skyrocketing if you're making a high definition, multi-platform, virtual reality, real-time PvP sort of thing. You can spend
You
tens of
forgot
millions on that.
photorealistic.
Sorry, let me put that in there, right? I mean, you can bankrupt a small nation
Right.
on those sorts of budgets. It doesn't have to be the way you do things, right? I think if you have a fundamentally strong core game mechanic in mind, prove it out. Prove it out with a prototype, with a community. And hey, if you're wrong, fail fast, and don't fail when you've got 100,000 people working for you, and
Right.
you've taken $100 million from investors who are going to be sad. I think you can go through those risk reduction moments in a much more measured way. That's really what I'm doing right now. I'm prototyping. I'm writing specs. I'm working with people who I get a few hours here and there to push this thing forward. I think that's how things are going to start to evolve.
Right.
The indie revolution isn't something that came out of the giant publishers, right? It came out of people who looked and said, it's a risk, but I think I can take this a certain way myself. I can push something forward. I have an idea, and I think the tools and resources are out there for me to be able to do something. This just happens to be my turn.
Yeah. I think another part of that though is that sometimes these people, these indie developers, they go off on their own and make the game they want to play. And you always hear that from a studio. Hey,
Sure.
we're making the game that we want to play. But is it the game that you want your name on? And I think there's a disconnect there. I'm working on Half-Life 14, but is it the game?
I hope somebody is.
Yeah, for real. But is it the game that I want, or is it a game that I like, right? And I think there's a kind of separation of that. Is
Right.
Look at Minecraft. He made a game that he wanted to play, and then he sold it to Microsoft for what, $2 billion or something.
And that's and I'll tell you, Tim, I would say if you were to look at the tectonic plates of the industry, if you will, like how the video game industry has been run in the 40 plus years that it's been a real business, 30 plus years of that has been, without the ability to get a lot of feedback from your gamer, right? You'd make a game, you'd ship it on whatever optical media du jour it was, a cartridge or a CD or a DVD. You'd throw it into retail, and you'd hope that the retailers prognosticated this correctly when they bought their initial purchase quantities, right? And over the past 10 years, you're able to turn that thing around 180 degrees, right? This to me is what's exciting about how the industry has evolved. And yes, you can, and believe me, I am, as a gamer and as now the CEO of my own gaming company, I have a vision and a passion and something I'm pursuing that I want to play. But I think other people will want to play it as well. Now, if I'm wrong, I'm going to learn that a lot faster, I think, than other places where I've worked over the past decade, where they've had to go through a much larger investment of time, money, of
Right.
people to find out if they had something that had heat with a bigger audience. Uh,
And at the
and
same time affecting other people's lives.
yeah, and look, if you find that you've got something that isn't resonating, you've got a couple options. You can damn the torpedoes and just keep going. Well, that's probably not going to work.
Right.
You can shut it down completely and say, all right, enough of the romance. It's time to go get a real job. Or you can pivot a bit and say, all right, I hear what the community is saying. I think this part's right. I think this part's not. Let me tweak a bit, pivot a bit, and see if this plays better. And I think the whole process of concepting a game, prototyping it, taking it to a vertical slice, you can do these things without investing a ton of money. And the perfect example of this for me in my career, it was Eve Valkyrie, right?
Right.
I mean, I'll go back in time a bit to the when I was living in Iceland, and I distinctly remember it was a few weeks before FanFest 2013, and the first Oculus Rift kits showed up in the Reykjavik office at CCP, because CCP was a formal backer of the Oculus Kickstarter. And so these things showed up, and a couple of our more talented, passionate engineers started tinkering with it. And within a couple of weeks, they had something that they had done in their spare time of rendering Eve assets, the ships that we had, the explosions we had, the nebulas we had, this awesome art we had, and rendering in Unity to be played in a prototype Oculus Rift. And you know, within 2 weeks, they had something sort of skunk work together on their off time, and they brought it and they said, hey, it wasn't just me, but I mean, for those who are Eve fans, it was me and John Lander, who was the EP of Eve at the time. We got the call of like, hey guys, we want to show you something. And I was just like, okay, this has to go to FanFest. This is awesome. And there was a lot of, whoa, we're not finished. We haven't. I'm like, I get that, but I am telling you, there is something exciting here that is different, and the fans are going to love having been brought in at that early stage.
Right.
And I think the thing we did with Oculus and with Valkyrie at CCP, that's how you ought to do it, right? You ought to go out there and try something interesting. Don't try to polish it to the nth degree. Get it in front of people fast and see what they think. And if this had been a complete dud, we would have known it very, very quickly. And as a company, we would have chosen perhaps not to invest in that or to change the approach a little bit. But that to me is how you do it, right? The stages of game production, it really is. Concept is a dude with a napkin writing some stuff down, right? That doesn't cost anything. If enough people believe in that concept, you then go to a prototype, and you have a handful on a prototype. And if that feels like you've got a prototype that is fun, now you take it to vertical slice, right?
Right.
This is how it's supposed to happen. And I think with all the capital out there and the number of people in the profession who have experience, sometimes we've lost our way a bit, and we've just gone big too soon.
Right.
I don't think you have to do that.
So I want to ask one question, and then you said "damn the torpedoes." I'm gonna try your history knowledge here. Do you know who said that?
Do not. Isn't that World War II something or other?
Way before. I mean, it's the Civil War.
Jesus.
David Farragut.
No, were there torpedoes in the Civil War?
It was the statement of "damn the torpedo, full speed ahead."
Were there really All right, look, is it okay? I'm no American history expert, Tim, but aren't we talking about ironclads and cannons? We didn't have torpedoes in the Civil War, did we?
So I did I'm looking it up just to make sure I'm right.
Okay.
During the American Civil War, he was the first rear admiral in the United States Navy. He is remembered to the order of the Battle of Mobile Bay, in which he was victorious. Usually paraphrased as "damn the torpedo, full speed ahead." 1810 to 1870.
Well, there you go. And I would not have known that. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you for the history lesson.
Hey,
That's great.
damn the torpedoes. Random knowledge. Hey, actually, random history knowledge. Do you know what this is?
I'm trying to see it. I don't. Can I see the other side? I have no idea what that is.
This is a Russian beard coin. In 1702, you had to pay a tax to wear a beard in Russia. And this is the coin that you were given when you paid that tax to.
That's cool.
And I actually got this coin. I got at PAX Prime 4 years ago. I traded somebody a PAX pin for it.
Yeah.
So,
well, heck, Tim, if we're showing coins off, hang on a second here. You know what this is?
That's a CCP coin.
It is. And it's something you only get after you have successfully survived 1 year as a full-time employee.
Survived.
Exactly. Right. You've
Wow.
made it through your first year with CCP. And I was
Troy is
delighted
here.
to, yeah, delighted to have mine handed to me by Hilmar himself at an executive offsite. But
That's awesome.
that this is something that I keep close to me as well.
That's
Right.
awesome.
There's something to be said about this sort of thing, whether
I
it's the military or other
exactly.
organizations.
So, but Troy has joined the chat room. So hi, Troy. Welcome.
Oh, look out! Here
So
we go.
with that, we'll just go ahead and shut down and pretend none of this has happened. So let's talk about this, David. You've mentioned freelancers and things like that, and community
Yeah.
involvement. How does somebody get involved ground level? Like if I wanted to
Oh, yeah.
freelance for you right now, if I said, hey, here's the time that I have, here are my talents, how would something like that go?
Well, thank you for asking. A couple thoughts I'd say to that. The first is that the best way to keep apprised of these kinds of things, and this will sound like a bit of a shill, and maybe it is, but seriously, will be to follow us on Twitter, on Facebook, go to the site and sign up for the newsletter, because that is how I'm going to start getting that word out. And in fact, people should expect that, I don't know, in the next few days, I'm probably going to get something out, because one of the first things I need right now is a video editor. And like I said, I'm not in a position where I'm ready to tell somebody, leave the great job you have and come to Metaarcade and make videos for us full time. But yeah, if there's somebody in the Seattle area, hopefully, who's ready to do some project work and do some freelancing on the side, that'd be great. And the way that information will get out will be through our Twitter feed, our Facebook page, the newsletter, and such like that.
Okay.
But beyond that, I would tell you that, like, people who, even beyond the freelancing, contracting sort of thing, look, the people who sign up for the newsletter and sign, follow us on those social venues are going to be the first people who are going to get a crack at the game, right? It just, when the prototype is ready, those will be the first people that we look to of getting involved, because they're people who've raised their hand and said, hey, I am interested in what you're doing. And so that will be the way that we begin that process. I would honestly say that, for people who do have that interest, look, you can always ping me. A direct message on Facebook or Twitter is easy. My email is super easy to remember. If you remember, I'm David, and my company's Metaarcade. It's just David at
No,
metaarcade.com.
that's too
And
easy.
it is super. Well, hey, when you're the CEO and founder, dude, you can make it as easy as you want, and that's what I chose to do.
It's not David.Reid at.
No underscores, no dots, none of that stuff. It's just,
Uh, you know, I, Troy is obviously here, and his email address at Carbine was the best email address ever. It was
okay.
his first name and his last name. So if you put his first initial last name together, the Wit.
Hewitt, the
No,
wit.
the
Ah,
Wit.
yes,
Yeah.
I get it.
So yep. So I'm gonna put your email
Which
address.
is a very ironic name for him, isn't it? He's not as witty as he thinks.
No, he's. I mean, there's what is that? What do you when you add less to the word? What do you get? Witless? Is that what that is? I love you, Troy. I'm gonna get punched in the face. Hey, David, I'm gonna put your email address on screen. Is that okay?
It's totally fine.
Okay, perfect. We'll make it scrolling text.
Oh, wow.
So when can kind of the world expect to hear something? Do you have like an ETA on that?
I do, and I don't want to overpromise and underdeliver. So I'll be a little measured as I say this, but I expect. Look, where are we now? We're in April.
Yes.
I expect that I'll be able to announce the first game that Metaarcade is making in Q2, which officially ends at the end of June, right? So I'm going to give myself a little breathing room. I'm fairly confident that I'll be able to tell you and others more about what our first project is
Okay.
specifically.
So with that, we want to kind of wrap it up. We're actually a little over the hour mark, but obviously we're gigantic fans, right? And that's
Yeah.
our focus, and that's where we started, and that's where we'll continue to fit. But what do you take away from your experience with Motiga and the community and everything that you did there that you're going to apply to Meta Arcade? And then the same token, what are some of the things that you want to avoid having happen that you kind of experienced within Meta or within Motiga
Yeah.
that kind of translate over?
Well, look, I'll tell you this. To start with, Motiga look, there's a great team making a great game there. Don't make no bones about it, right? And I know it's choppy waters, and I know that the community is certainly waiting for news. And I'm just not the guy who's the right guy to give you the news these days, right? I've been out of it for a few months. I'm not a Motiga spokesperson. I will tell you, as a gamer, uh, I expect this game to ship, right? I can't tell you exactly when, I can't tell you exactly how, but I think the community that has been following Gigantic, I think there will be a happy ending there. I think that game is gonna find the right partner to get it out the door and for it to be the great game that people are hoping for it to be. So I just want to start with that, right? I realize a lot of people are hoping to hear more. I'm not the right guy to give you more than that, but I, as a gamer, as a person who's been working in this industry for darn near 20 years, I feel pretty good that that is where this is going, and that Motiga will remember that you guys, were there when the times were a little tough. And I do think that there's still some really good people working on that game. I think it's going to be just fine. And when you talk about what I guess at some level that I have learned and want to take with me, I will tell you this: I'd like to find a way, first and foremost, to emulate the community coach program. Now we're making at Motiga, we were making a 5-on-5 PvP style game. Uh, what I'm doing right now is a little different, maybe a lot different, and the idea of a coach program is going to have to take a different shape. But make no bones about it. I think both as a gamer and frankly as a capitalist, I think it's the right thing to do. I think this is how you better ensure success of your title. No one will be more honest with you about whether your game is good or not than your community. And if they like what they see, no one will be a more effective evangelist for your game than a community member. So that is definitely something I will find a way to adopt and bring to Metaarcade in the right way. Beyond that, I think there's, I loved the events. I loved the events we did at Motiga, and not just, yeah, I can wax eloquently about how much I loved our booth, how much I loved the art, how much I loved sort of like seeing the 5-on-5 and
And
coaches
the
behind it
drinking.
and things. Oh well, I loved my drinking, right? I mean, that's not going to change. Scotch will be a fundamental part of Meta Arcade
I
in
just
some
remember
fashion.
the last time I saw you was at the Dreadnought party.
Well, yeah, I might have had a few drinks there. That was
Wait, you drove me
again,
back to the hotel. Now,
it
how
wasn't too many,
intoxicated?
right? I was all
Wait
right.
a
We were
second.
fine.
Did I have life
Everybody
insurance
got
then?
up safely. Hey, you're a parent. I'm a parent. No,
That's
no
true.
risk we're going to be taking in that scenario.
Risk
And
versus reward.
but I do think there's something to that. I would say that at Motiga and at CCP, I learned a lot about community, and I learned to love it. It is at times it can feel like if you're a community professional and it's your job, like a Troy, like an Allie and Evan at Motiga, like the people at CCP that I've worked with, right? It can feel it can feel like a really tough gig, but when you're working with the community and they're enjoying what you're doing and they're receptive to it, there is no better feeling, right? I mean, I even when times were tough in Motiga, I would always encourage people, do these kinds of things. Get on stream, do an interview, talk to the community, because this is why we do what we do. Yes, it's a business. Yes, it's got to pay the bills, but the joy you get out of a community that's loving the game, there's nothing like it in our industry, in our
Right.
profession. And you'll see it'll probably look different, and I got to think about how that comes to pass at Meta Arcade, but that is absolutely something I'm taking with me.
Good. And I
I mean,
think it's
and the only
important
thing I'd
though.
say about kind of the flip side of that, Tim, when you said, hey, what don't you want to do, I would say, look, don't get over your skis, right? Is the analogy I think of. I think of that guy skiing downhill and he's going a little too fast, and all of a sudden he's in the air and he has a horrible wipeout at the bottom.
Right.
A lot of these financial problems that studios have run into, yes, we're all a victim of circumstance sometimes, but a lot of this is self-inflicted. A lot of this is predictable. A lot of this is understandable. Look, if I'm going to wipe out at the bottom of the ski jump, I only want to take myself out, right? And when I know that we can fit a bit more, then we'll hire a few more people. And when I know we can get a little bigger, great. But I don't ever want to be in the business of budget deficits, if you will, right? Of spending money we don't have, and in the pursuit of, I think a lot of studios go after what a colleague of mine at CCP once called the relentless pursuit of more, right? Just you don't, you know, you don't always need that, and it can be very seductive once you raise a bunch of money to do more and to let the scope increase. I would rather start from a fundamental of knowing, all right, there's a seed of something here. Now let's go. Now let's raise some money. Let's get some more people. Let's grow. Let's do those things.
Right.
But not until then. And I hope to have some of that ready for people. Like I said, I think I'll have a prototype for people to play with in 2016. I'm very confident.
Hold you to that.
All right.
So are you familiar with Franklin Covey? The
Franklin Covey, the
yeah.
7 Habits, et cetera,
Yeah.
et cetera. Oh, sure. Yeah.
They have another one, the theories of execution, and
Okay.
one of those talks about WIGs, or wildly important goals. And I think that, as the number of wildly important goals grows, you start losing actual productivity. So if
Yeah.
a team, the size of 5 or 10 people focuses on one wildly important goal, they're going to complete that goal. But if they have 2 or 3, they're probably only going to get 1 or 2 done. They
Yep.
get up to 5 plus, nothing is going to get done because A, the whirlwind, the day to day gets in the way of that, and B, your focus is just so extremely diverged in every direction that you can't. And I think that
Well,
it's good
it's
that
absolutely right. I mean, really, especially when you get to a point where fundraising is part of the picture. Boy, it's hard for fundraising not to take top priority, and I think you just want to try and avoid that as long as you can, at least until you're certain you know what it is you're building
right,
and you've got traction with the community and you know that that's the right thing to do. Don't allow yourself to fall into that trap
right,
of having too many. I like that. Wigs,
yep,
too many wildly
important,
important goals,
yep,
right?
or wickedly important. It's depending on how you
Wickedly important. All
Yep.
right, thank you. Thank you
Wickedly
for
or
that.
wild. It doesn't matter, whichever one you want to say. So, so with that, David, I want to kind of wrap this up and really thank you for your time. Um, you know, take the floor. Give us your spiel. Your social media. Share all the your website with us. Tell us how we can stay involved.
Absolutely, that's great. Thank you, Tim. It's been a blast here, and it's a blast to talk with you and
Of
get
course,
back
it
in
is.
with the gigantic community a bit more as well. It's I miss you guys, and I hope we're all drinking scotch at PAX for sure. PAX Prime. I'm not going to make it to East, but I can't this year. There's a little too much going on.
That's fine.
But yeah, to your question, right? It's real simple. I'm still Pokethulu on Twitter, POKETHULHU. If you want to have that discussion over a drink about what the heck that means, I am happy to have that discussion with anybody. But Pokethulu's the handle I've got on. It's on Xbox Live. It's my Twitter account. It's kind of the thing I've done everywhere, even at CCP and Motiga, and so that's contained and still the thing. But yeah, I'm on Facebook, as is Metaarcade. I'm on Twitter, as is Metaarcade, and you can just follow us at Metaarcade on either of those two things. The website's at metaarcade.com. You can sign up for the newsletter there, and that's the best way to find out what's going on. And if you got something burning in your craw that you really just want to talk to me about, send me a direct message on Twitter or email me at david@metaarcade.com. I guarantee you nobody's getting that except for me right now.
You don't have CEO at MetaArcade?
I don't think I need to yet.
No,
I,
not
I
yet.
think David is doing the trick just fine.
Okay. How does that feel, by the way? I want to diverge quickly, but how does it feel to say, "Hey, I'm the CEO now"? Did you put up a
You know,
sign in your
I,
parking lot or in your driveway that says CEO parking only?
no. I mean, look, I will tell you this: the West Coast of the United States is probably the place where you find more CEOs of one-person companies than you'll find anywhere else in the world. But the good news is, it's a place where those CEOs are probably taken more seriously than they are anywhere else in the
Yeah.
world. And so, it's a like we did here. It's a modest celebration. It's not fireworks and dancing people, right? I am happy to be doing it, and I feel like it's the right time in my career to be helming something.
Right.
Uh, but yeah, I'll celebrate when there's traction. I'll celebrate when we've proven that there's something here.
Well, good. And I, we look forward to it, and we're sad to see you have left, the Motiga because you were a big part of that. But I think you left a good kind of footprint for them to kind of pick up and run with, right? So it's the ball's now in their court.
Absolutely. And
So
like I said, look, it's all still very friendly. I see these guys regularly. I'm pulling for them, and I think they're going to be fine.
when's the last?
It's
Who's your favorite hero in Gigantic?
I'm still an HK man. I
Okay.
just I don't know what it is. The animation, the art, the powers, the effects. That's still my guy.
Okay. Fair enough. Fair enough. So with that, I'd like to thank everybody for turning out. We are going to have this VOD up on YouTube. As soon as we get done here, we're going to close it off. Definitely click the follow button here on Twitch. Make sure you go follow David on Twitter in their Metaarcade and the Po Cthulhu. And as I close this up,
You got it.
I want to talk about something real quick that's kind of close to everybody's heart in this community, and that's Troy. Troy recently went through some tragedy in his life, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. But I reached out in private to a couple of people and said, "Hey, I want to put together a fundraiser to send Troy and his family on vacation, just to give them an escape." And Troy, being the community manager that he is, caught wind of that, and he said, "Tim, no, let's take that. Let's take that and do the same thing, but let's raise money for somebody who needs it a little more than I do." And so I want to talk about Steven Stopin. I'm probably going to say the last name incorrectly, but he's the chief operating officer of Able Gamers, who we've put together a fundraiser for just a couple days ago when we've raised $755 towards alternate transportation for
Awesome.
him. He lost use of his thumb due to a degenerative disease that he has, and so we're trying to raise money and trying to raise awareness for it. So I'm gonna link that here in Twitch. And the only thing that I ask from anybody here is just share this message out, because there's really two messages here. One, this man living with a disability isn't letting it stop his life. There's an article that he wrote that if you're afraid of something, don't let that stop you. And I guess that kind of sits true to this, David. Is when you sat down and said, "Hey, Meta Arcade," it was probably scary as hell, but you didn't let it stop you.
Yeah.
And so I think that Troy went through all of these tragedies, but the power behind his conviction to say, "Hey, let's help him instead." I cried. I'm not gonna lie. It was because it was impactful and it was emotional. And I think the big thing is we are the gaming world is niched, right? We have everybody who's a gamer, and then we have the niches of gamers, and those smaller communities make up the whole. But I think at the end of the day, we're all gamers, and gamers have to help gamers. Yeah, we have trolls, yeah, we have all this crap, but none of that should matter when it comes to the real world and in the day to day. So share out this fundraiser for me. Let people know and just get the word out, and let's help Steven kind of get back to being Steven with some mobility. And so with that,
Love it.
I'm gonna shut the feed down. David, thanks so much for joining us. We miss you, but I'm glad to see that you're still around, and maybe we'll do another one of these, in 6 months, or at least a night for scotch. So
Yeah. Very good. I got to
with
go
that,
do a refill anyway, Tim. I'm a little
all
ahead of
right,
you.
guys, I'm gonna shut it down. But thanks so much for coming by, and we'll see you soon. Take care.
Absolutely. Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Tim.